My name is Serena Voss, and before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, I need you to understand something about me. I am not a bitter woman. I am not someone who sits around nursing wounds or replaying old pain. I was raised in a three-bedroom house in Greensboro, North Carolina, by a single mother who cleaned other people's homes so I could have new sneakers on the first day of school every year. I know what it means to stretch a dollar until it screams. I know what it means to smile through embarrassment, to eat pride for dinner when the lights almost got cut off. I know what real is. So when I tell you that winning $14.7 million dollars in the Powerball on a random Tuesday in October changed my life in ways I never expected, I don't mean the money. I mean what the money showed me about the people sitting at my own Thanksgiving table. I want you to stay with me on this because this story isn't about getting rich. It's about finding out who you really are to the people who claim to love you. And honey, that revelation was worth every single penny. The ticket cost me $2. I bought it at a quick trip off Highway 29 at 11:47 on a Tuesday night because I was low on gas and it was raining sideways, and the woman behind the counter smiled at me like we were old friends. And I thought, why not? $2. I can spare $2. I didn't check the numbers until Thursday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment in Charlotte, drinking Maxwell House coffee because I hadn't made it to the grocery store, scrolling through my phone while the morning news played low in the background. I pulled up the lottery app. I matched the first number, then the second, then the third. By the time I got to the sixth number, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone on the tile floor and cracked the corner of the screen. I sat in that kitchen for 4 hours. I called nobody. I cried twice. I made a second cup of coffee. I Googled what to do if you win the lottery 7 different times. And then I made a decision that changed everything. I was not going to tell a single soul. Not yet. Because I had read enough stories. I had seen enough episodes of whatever true crime show warned you about lottery winners who ended up broke and betrayed within 5 years. I had enough common sense to know that money doesn't just change the winner, it changes everyone around them. And I wanted to know, before I changed my life, exactly who was already in it. So I hired a financial attorney in Raleigh named Patricia Eldridge, a sharp-tongued woman in her 60s with silver locks and a no-nonsense handshake who had handled 3 lottery winners before me and looked at me across her mahogany desk like she already knew every mistake I was about to almost make. We set up a trust, filed the paperwork quietly, and I collected my winnings in one lump sum, $9.2 million dollars after taxes. She set up a private account, gave me a debit card tied to an LLC with a name that meant nothing to anyone, and told me to live my normal life for 60 days. Don't buy anything big, she said. Don't quit your job. Don't change your hair. Don't do anything that makes you look like you suddenly have money, because people can smell money even when you're hiding it. Just live and watch. So that's what I did. I went back to my job at the insurance company on Monday morning like nothing happened. I answered emails, I ate a sad desk salad for lunch, I complained about the printer being jammed. I was a completely unremarkable human being for 60 days, and I watched. I want you to understand the setup before I introduce you to the cast, because the cast is everything. My family is big and loud and Southern and loves each other the way a lot of Southern families do, fiercely at holidays and barely at all the rest of the year. My mama, Dolores, lived 40 minutes away in a townhouse in Concord that I'd been helping her pay rent on for 3 years because her knees were bad and she had had to cut back her hours at the dry cleaner. My older sister, Renata, lived in Atlanta with her husband Deke, a man who had been between jobs for going on 4 years and who spent most of his time coaching youth football and calling it a career. My younger brother, Tavion, was 26 and living in Durham in an apartment. In the third week of November, I staged the first test. I called my sister Renata on a Wednesday evening, casual as a summer breeze. We talked for a few minutes about nothing, her kids, the weather, whether Mama's arthritis had been acting up, and then I let it slip. casual as exhaling that I was in a rough spot. I told her my car had thrown a check engine light and the mechanic was quoting me $1,100 to fix it. And I didn't have it right now because I'd had to cover my rent and my student loan and my credit card, and I was just stressed. Renata made a sympathetic sound. She said, "Girl, you know how it is." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I would help you, but you know we're tight right now with Deke's situation." I said, "Of course, I understand." She said, "Have you tried getting a payment plan with the mechanic?" I said, "Yeah, I'll figure it out." We talked for 5 more minutes and then she said she had to go because one of the kids was acting up. She never asked how much I needed. She never said, "Let me see what I can do." She never called back. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. I wrote it down in a little notebook I kept in my nightstand. Renata, asked nothing, offered nothing. The following week, I called Tavion, my baby brother who I had lent money to 6 times in the past 2 years. Total amount, $4,200. He had paid back maybe 800 of it in bits and pieces. I was not keeping score, or I hadn't been, but I was keeping score now. I told him the same story. Car trouble, tight month, really stressed. Tavion said, "Dang, sis, that's rough." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What you gonna do?" I said, "I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out." He said, "You should look into one of those financing apps. Didn't you tell me about that app where they give you a cash advance?" I said, "Yeah, maybe." He said, "Hey, actually, since I have you on the phone, my homie is doing a mixtape release party and he needs investors, like seed money kind of. And I told him I might be able to throw in a couple hundred. You think you could spot me until the first?" I almost laughed. I didn't. I said I was too tight right now. He said he understood. He got off the phone 3 minutes later to go to practice. I wrote it down. Tavion asked for money while I was asking for help. My cousin Brianna, I tested differently. I posted a vague story on Instagram. Nothing dramatic, just a picture of a bill on my counter and a caption that said, "Adulting is a scam. Sending prayers to everyone out here grinding." It was bait, clean and simple. Brianna saw it. I could see her view on my close friends list. She reacted with a little prayer hands emoji. She did not text. She did not call. 3 days later, she posted a picture in a new coat I hadn't seen before, standing outside of a restaurant in downtown Raleigh with people I didn't know, captioned, "Life is good when you move right." I stared at that post for a long time. I wrote it down. Brianna saw the signal, kept scrolling. And then I called Mama. Dolores Ann Voss, 63 years old, bad knees, worn hands, the woman who had shaped everything decent in me. I told her the same story. Car trouble, money tight, stressed. Mama got quiet for a second. Then she said, "How much is it?" I said, "Now here's the part where Lena comes in, and I need you to brace yourself. Because I loved this woman. I am telling you right now, before I tell you what I found out, that I loved Lena Samuels with my whole chest. She was the sister I chose. She knew things about me that I have never told another human being. We had a shorthand, a history, a language that only made sense between us. So understand that what I'm about to tell you did not just hurt, it restructured me. About 6 weeks into my 60-day window, I started noticing things that I had probably been noticing for a while but refusing to name. Small things at first. Lena canceling plans more than usual, Lena being vague about where she'd been, Lena mentioning my brother, Tavion, in conversations in ways that were a little too casual, a little too familiar, referencing things he'd said or done that I hadn't told her about. I had introduced them at my birthday dinner 2 years ago. They had met maybe 4 times total that I knew of, or that I thought I knew of. I am not a paranoid person. I want to be very clear about that. I don't spiral. I don't assume. I am a woman who requires evidence before I render a verdict, which is probably why I was good at my insurance job. But I also know how to pay attention. And my gut, the gut my mother gave me, the gut that had kept me safe in this world, was talking, so I paid attention. I went through nothing illegal. I want to be clear about that too. I didn't hack anyone's phone. I didn't hire a private investigator. I simply started listening more carefully than I had been. When Lena called, I asked more questions. When she mentioned Tavion, I probed gently. When she said she'd been at home all weekend, I mentioned, casually, that I'd driven past her apartment Saturday around noon and her car wasn't there. She said she'd gone to get groceries. I said, "Oh, which store?" She named one. I said, "Oh, I love that one. Did you try their hot bar?" She said, "Yeah, it was good." That store had been closed for renovations for 3 weeks. I had driven past it myself. She lied to my face without blinking. 3 days later, Tavion called me. He was in a good mood, talking about this new track he was working on, and he mentioned that he'd been spending time with someone new, someone who understood the vision, someone older and smart, and then he caught himself, just slightly, just enough. He said, "She just gets it, you know?" I said, "Who is she?" He said, "Just someone I've been talking to." I said, "Do I know her?" He laughed the way someone laughs when they're nervous. He said, "Nah, I don't think so." Okay. I sat with that for a week. I processed it the way I process everything, quietly, thoroughly, from every angle, and then I made a call I did not want to make, to a woman I knew named Cassidy who worked in digital marketing and who had skills I will not describe in detail, and I simply asked her a question about a certain public Venmo account. What Cassidy found, publicly available, I want to emphasize, was a series of transactions between a Venmo account registered to a T.Voss and an account with Lena's face and name, going back almost 8 months. Regular payments, the kind of regularity that tells a story. My brother, my best friend, 8 months. While she sat across from me at brunch and complained about men, while she called me at midnight to talk about loneliness, while I drove to her apartment in the rain at 2 in the morning because she cried on the phone. She looked me in the eye again and again and again, and she chose to hide it. Not because she was afraid of losing me. If she'd been afraid of losing me, she would have told me. She hid it because she wanted to keep both. She wanted the friendship and the secret, and she didn't think I would ever find out. She didn't think I was paying that close attention. She did not know me at all. 60 days passed. I called Patricia Eldridge. I told her I was ready. I gave her a list. Then I quit my job. I did not make a scene. I simply put in my 2 weeks, cleaned out my desk, and walked out of that building on a Thursday afternoon into the October air and felt the whole weight of a life I was done with fall off my shoulders. I hired a real estate agent in Atlanta named Jerome, a man with a tight beard and quiet eyes who found me a house in Buckhead, a 5-bedroom stone colonial on a private acre with a pool and a chef's kitchen and ceilings so high they made you feel like you were standing inside a church. I paid cash. I had Patricia handle the wire transfer. I closed on the property in 3 weeks. I hired an interior designer. I gave her a budget and told her to go make it look like someone lived there who had always known they deserved beautiful things. I spent December in Raleigh, living quietly in my apartment while the house was being set up. I told nobody, not a soul. For Christmas, I flew my mama to Charlotte and took her to dinner at a nice restaurant and gave her a card. Inside the card was a letter. The letter said that I had something to tell her, and that we would talk about it soon, and that she did not need to worry about her rent anymore, and that I loved her more than I had ever been able to say out loud. She read it twice. She looked at me across the table with those knowing eyes. She said, "Baby, what did you do?" I said, "Something good, Mama, I promise." She said, "You've been keeping something from me." I said, "I'll tell you everything in January." She said, "You better." We ate steak and laughed, and she made fun of the fancy dessert menu, and it was the best Christmas I could remember in years. In January, I made my moves. The first move was Renata. I sent her a text. "Hey, I've been going through some things, and I have some news to share. I'm having a small gathering at my new place in Atlanta next month. I'd love for you to come." She responded 20 minutes later. "New place? In Atlanta? Girl, what is going on? Call me. I didn't call. I sent her the address. She texted back, "Is this a joke? This is a Buckhead address." I said, "No joke, February 14th. Come early." The house was ready by the end of January. I moved in on a Tuesday morning with 3 movers and a playlist and a bottle of champagne I drank by myself in the kitchen that evening, sitting on a bar stool, looking out at a backyard that was mine. Just mine. No explanation owed to anyone. I told my mother first, that same week. I drove to Concord, sat across from her at her kitchen table, and told her everything. The ticket, the quick trip, the 4 hours in the kitchen, Patricia Eldridge, the trust, the house, the 60 days. She listened without interrupting. That in itself was remarkable because my mother has never in her life listened to a story without interrupting. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You tested us." I said, "Yes." She said, "And everybody failed except me." I said, "You didn't fail, Mama. You were everything." She didn't cry. She looked at me steady and she said, "You raised me to pay attention." And then she walked in wearing a green dress, which had always been her color, and she hugged me at the door and said, "Girl, why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "That's what tonight's about." And she laughed and kissed my cheek and walked in and looked around, and I watched her take in my mother sitting on the couch in the living room, looking serene and beautiful, and I watched something flicker across Lena's face. Not guilt, not yet. Just the first tremor of something she hadn't predicted. I let everyone have a drink. I let them eat. I let them talk among themselves, feel the house out, relax into it. I watched Deke walk through every room like he was appraising the property. I watched Brianna take videos for her Instagram story. I watched Tavion and Lena carefully not look at each other for 30 minutes and then carefully not notice that they were carefully not looking at each other. I watched all of it. And then I picked up my champagne glass and I said, "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" The room went quiet. I said, "I want to tell y'all a story." I told it from the beginning. All of it. The quick trip, the ticket, the kitchen, the financial attorney, the trust, the 60 days of waiting. I told it straight. No performance, just facts. The way Patricia Eldridge had taught me. Facts are power, and power doesn't need to be loud. I watched their faces change in real time. Brianna's hand went to her mouth. Renata grabbed Deke's arm. Tavion laughed a short laugh and then stopped laughing. My mother sat in her chair with a small, knowing smile of a woman who already knew the punchline. Then I said, "But before I tell you about the money, I want to tell you about the test." And that's when the temperature in the room shifted. I said, "In November, I told each of you that I was struggling. My car was in the shop. I needed $1,100. I was stressed and tight, and I didn't know what to do." I looked at Renata. I said, "You told me you knew how it was and suggested I ask the mechanic for a payment plan." Renata's face went still. I looked at Tavion. I said, "You told me to look into a cash advance app, and then you asked me to loan you money for your friend's mixtape party." Tavion opened his mouth and closed it. I looked at Brianna. I said, "You saw my Instagram story and sent a prayer emoji, and then posted a picture in a new coat the next day." Brianna looked at the floor. I said, "And then I called Mama." My mother looked up. Her eyes were bright. I said, "Mama offered me everything she had, without asking questions, without calculating what it would cost her. $400 right then, and the rest on Friday. That's what love that has no conditions looks like. I just wanted to make sure everyone in this room saw it clearly." The room was absolutely silent. My 3 friends, stationed at different points in the room, watched without saying a word. Then I said, "And now I have something to say to Lena." I turned to face her. She was standing near the mantel, champagne glass still in her hand, very still. She had gone a shade paler than she'd walked in. I said, "Lena, you and I have been friends for 22 years. She said, "Serena." I said, "I'm not finished." She went quiet. I said, "For 8 months, you have been involved with my brother in a way you hid from me. Not because you were afraid of how I'd react, because if you were afraid, you would have come to me. You hid it because you wanted to keep both. You wanted me in your corner, and you wanted your secret, and you thought I wasn't paying close enough attention to figure it out. You sat across from me at brunch. You called me crying at midnight. You let me drive to your apartment in the rain because you didn't want to be alone. And the whole time you looked me in the eye and you lied. She said, it happened and I didn't know how to. I said, the how to was not complicated. 22 years gave you 100 opportunities and you chose every single one of them wrong. She had tears in her eyes. Real ones, I think. But tears don't rewind 8 months. They don't erase what was built in the dark. I said, I'm not angry with you, Lena. I want you to hear that. I'm not standing here in this house.
Here's what happened next. I had already paid off my mother's remaining balance on her townhouse in Concord, which I then transferred into her name outright. The townhouse was hers, deed and all, free and clear, to sell or keep or do with whatever she wanted. I had also set up a monthly allowance through the trust, $3,000 a month, deposited on the first, no strings, no questions, no explanation required. She was done working for the rest of her life. Her knees were done wearing out on other people's floors. For Renata, Tavion, and Brianna, I did nothing. I want to be very clear. I did not cut them off with a speech. I did not send a dramatic message. I did not make a scene. I simply did nothing. No money, no favors, no open door policy on my new life. The inheritance of the relationship we had before I got rich was exactly that, the relationship we had before I got rich. If they wanted something different, they could build it with behavior, not with blood ties. Blood is a starting point, not a guarantee. What I did do for Tavion specifically was this. I called him 2 days after the gathering and I told him, quietly and without theater, that I knew about him and Lena. I told him I wasn't his enemy. I told him that whatever he had going with her was his business to sort out. But I told him that if he wanted a relationship with me going forward, it would have to be built on honesty from the jump. No more hiding, no more vague, no more pretending we were close when we were only convenient. He was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he said, I'm sorry, sis. I said, I know. I said, earn it. And I hung up. As for Lena, I did not make her a villain. That was the most important thing, because the instinct when you've been betrayed is to make the other person a monster, to remake the whole history into something dark so the ending makes sense. But 22 years were real. The girl who held my hand at my daddy's funeral when I was 19 years old was real. The friendship was real, even when the person inside it wasn't being real with me. So I didn't drag her. I didn't expose her. I didn't call her out on social media or send her texts designed to wound. I simply closed the door. I told her, in a message I wrote and rewrote 4 times until it was exactly what I meant and nothing more, that I loved her and I forgave her and I was done. That those 3 things could all be true at once. That I hoped she figured out what she actually wanted before she lost something else she couldn't get back. She read it. She never responded, and somehow that was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. By April, I had begun to understand what it meant to actually have money. Not the fantasy of it, not the number in an account, but the texture of it in daily life. What it means to make a decision and not feel fear underneath it. What it means to sleep with that low-level hum of financial anxiety that I had lived with so long I'd started to think it was just part of being alive. It wasn't. It was just poverty, and I was done with it. I hired a business consultant named Phyllis out of Midtown Atlanta, a woman who had started 3 companies and sold 2, and knew how to think about money the way most people think about breathing, constantly, naturally, without drama. We began building out an investment strategy, a real estate portfolio, a philanthropic arm. I bought a duplex in Durham near Tavion's neighborhood, not to give to him, but to rent out. Smart investment in a market I knew. I bought a commercial property in Concord, 2 miles from my mother's townhouse, that housed a small nail salon and a tax preparation office, both of which were thriving. Passive income is quiet and patient, and it works while you sleep, and I was falling in love with it.
I started a scholarship fund for girls in Greensboro, North Carolina, the city where my mother had cleaned other people's floors, where I had worn new sneakers on the first day of school every year because she refused to let me walk in feeling small. The scholarship was for girls going into their junior year of college, specifically girls in financial services and law, specifically girls who had too much potential and not enough runway. I named it after my mother, the Dolores Voss Foundation for Women Who Know What They're Worth.
August, 6 months after the gathering. Renata called me for the first time since February. She led with small talk. The kids, the summer, how hot Atlanta had been. I let her talk. Then she said, carefully, that she'd been thinking about what I'd said at the gathering, about the test. She said she'd been sitting with it, and she thought I was right, that she could have done more. She said she was sorry. I appreciated the apology. I did not immediately open a door. I said, I hear you, Renata. Let's take it slow. She said, okay. We talked for 20 more minutes about regular things. It was fine. It wasn't fixed, but it was a beginning, if she meant it. Time would tell. Deke, I heard through Renata, had taken a job offer with a sports management company, a real job, with a salary and health insurance and a commute. I don't know what shifted for him. Maybe watching what I'd built in 6 months moved something. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. I didn't need it to be about me. I just noted it. People are capable of change. I believe that. I require evidence, but I believe it. Brianna sent me a DM on Instagram in July. She said, congratulations on everything. You deserve it. I responded with a heart. That was all. She got what she gave. Tavian surprised me. He showed up at the Buckhead house in September unannounced, which normally I would have been irritated by, but when I opened the door, I saw his face, and I didn't say anything about the unannounced part. He had driven 3 hours from Durham, and he looked like someone who had been arguing with himself the whole way there. He stood on my doorstep with his hands in his pockets, and he said, I ended it with Lena. I said, okay. He said, it wasn't right, what we did. I knew it wasn't right, and I did it anyway because I wanted what I wanted, and I told myself you wouldn't find out, and that made it okay. But it wasn't okay. I said, no, it wasn't. He said, I'm sorry, Serena, for all of it. The money I owe you, the hiding, all of it. I looked at my brother for a long moment, 26 years old, still figuring out who he is. Not a bad person. I never thought he was a bad person. Just a person who had taken the easier road for too long and was finally starting to understand what roads cost you. I said, you want to come in? He said, yeah. I said, Mama's here. She's going to want to feed you. He said, that's fine. He came inside. Mama made him a plate without asking. We sat at the kitchen table until almost midnight, the 3 of us, talking and laughing, and sometimes not talking at all, just being in the same room, in the way families sometimes forget how to be. It wasn't fixed, it was a beginning. And I was finding more and more that beginnings were enough. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before that Tuesday at the Quick Trip. Money doesn't change people. I know everyone says it does, and I understand why, because the changes seem to happen right when money arrives. But what money actually does is remove the conditions that people use to hide who they already are. It peels back the circumstances, the busyness, the excuse of survival. I was rich before I won a dime. I just didn't know it yet. My name is Serena Voss, and I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, in a 3-bedroom house, and my mother cleaned other people's floors, and I wore new sneakers every first day of school, and I bought a $2 ticket at a Quick Trip off Highway 29 on a rainy Tuesday in October, and I found out who loved me when I had nothing. That woman is still me. The house in Buckhead is real. The trust is real. The Dolores Voss Foundation for Women Who Know What They're Worth is real and accepting applications. But the most real thing I own is the knowing, and nobody can touch that. Not with a lawsuit,
not with a guilt trip, not with 22 years of history or blood or a prayer hands emoji or a sob story or a slick smile at a Valentine's Day party. I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly who showed up. One person, and she was always the one.